Good afternoon. Thanks for attending this session. So, does size matter when it comes to branding? Or to ask the question in a more formal way, does the size of your organization prevent you from using brand as a tool for growth? Well, my view on this is that the size of your organization does not prevent you from using brand as a tool for growth. And in fact, as a statement, if you like, or a point of view from me that builds on that, I'd go so far as to say that strategy and tactics might change, but regardless of the sector you work in, whether you work in B2B or B2C, if you work for a big company, a medium-sized one, or a startup, every organization can build their brand so that it becomes their most important and most valuable asset in the pursuit of growth and or profit. There are a set of tools and principles that are applicable to every business of every shape and size. The challenge is in the application of them. So what I'm basically saying there is I believe that brand is fair game. It's fair game for any organization that wants to use brand as a tool for growth. And they should do, as I believe that also brand is one of the most powerful business tools ever invented. So what I'd like to do is unpack this a bit more. But before I do, just thought I'd give you a bit more background about me. So I'm Andy Cridland. I've been working in brand and marketing now for just over 20 years. I've worked both client side and agency side. I've worked for some of the biggest organizations in the world with big budgets. I've worked for big organizations with small budgets. I've also worked with some small independent companies, even startups with little to no budget. So I've seen the application of brand from lots of different perspectives. And hopefully it's that experience that I can bring to the table and add some value with that today. Okay, so without further ado, let's jump in. I'd like to start with just walking through some of the some of my most favourite brand activation exercises I've seen in the recent years. I'd like to start with Brewdog, and they produced the world's strongest beer. It was 55%, so I'm sure you'll agree it's fairly punchy. But served in a dead squirrel or a dead, I think it's a stoat, or a taxidermied one to be precise. But you can imagine the impact that this product created when Brewdog launched it. And they did it at a time which was fairly early on in their formation. I think they did it around 2010. So they would have been a couple of years old at the time, but they certainly wouldn't have had huge budgets to invest in marketing and advertising. But this really put them on the map. It started to get attention. It started to get activation in terms of the way that the media responded to it. And it certainly sort of made people sort of see it, stand up and take note that they were about. Sticking with Brewdog, a few years later, they hired a tank and drove it through the city of London. And they did this in response to the fact that they'd been denied funding from whoever they'd been applying to funding for at the time. And it was almost, if you like, a declaration of war. That's certainly how I perceived it anyway. And them saying that if you're not going to give us funding, then we will set up our own crowdfunding platform in the form of what they called Equity for Punks, which still exists today. And that would be used as a key means of growing the business. And so it was almost a little bit of a classic Brewdog tactic in line with the way in which they established the brand, this irreverent sort of independent, fuck you a little bit, we'll do this our own way, if you like. And it really, you can imagine again, grabbed attention, really made people stand up and see the brand for who they were. And it got people talking, an important point, which we'll come on to in a bit more detail later. Sticking with Brewdog, and a few years later, in fact, now coming to more recent times, and we see now that Brewdog has become the UK's fastest growing food and drinks brand. Very successful organisation today with revenues towards 78 million, up 55% year on year. So doing very well according to the information that I could certainly find from them on the internet. Interesting to see though that their brand positioning, their brand attitude, the way in which they go about communicating, that attitude stays very front and center in the activity that they use, and we see that coming through in the types of advertising and the way in which they communicate. The tactics, though, interestingly, have changed. We've seen them taking on board more traditional forms of media as they continue to try and grow the business. And there's good reason for that, and we'll touch on that in more detail later on. But interestingly, we also see that them using more targeted forms of communications via social media. Here I've grabbed an image from Facebook where they were clearly just targeting me as someone who could be a potential buyer. I had indeed been searching for information about buying some beer, and sure enough, here's an ad from Brewdog, which is asking me to buy if I want to buy their beer here now, and a simple way just to click through and buy that if I wanted to do it. So that's Brewdog, and then moving on to a different category now, into the world of toilet rolls or toilet paper. And I'm sure you'll agree, not the most sexiest or the most exciting category from which to build a brand. That is, unless you are Simon Griffiths. And Simon Griffiths and his co-founders set up an organisation called Who Gives a Crap. It's an excellent organisation. It is a company which creates sustainably centric toilet rolls. And 50% of their products goes towards helping developing countries and developing areas with their sanitation. And so they put 50% of their profits towards that. So yeah, an excellent company. To launch the business, Simon Griffiths decided he would sit on the toilet for 2 days. An activation which really grabbed attention and got people sort of taking note of the business. And in fact, I believe, again, according to the information I've got, that they raised $50,000 in funding through that process. And of course, got people talking again. Fast forward to more recent times, and we see that the business Who Gives a Crap is now doing extremely well. And from what I understand, they have revenues in excess of around 20 million, and they've donated up to 5.85 million in donations to sanitation efforts around the world. So a great organization, lots of attention, doing very well. And then on to the world of B2B. And MailChimp. MailChimp, I believe, was founded around 2007. The founders really became focused on it in more 2010. But it started life as an email marketing platform. But its focus has always been on small business. And as the organization has grown, they've really embraced small business as their target market and really wanted to put themselves into a position whereby they demonstrate a very real and human approach to engaging with small businesses and wanting to demonstrate that they're not just there to provide them with a piece of technology, but they're also there to provide them with some support and help. And this comes through in the language they use, the branding they use, the assets they produce, the way they go to market. It feels far more human than perhaps other technology brands, which could be seen as being a little bit more cold and inhumane, if you like. So it served them very, very well as they've grown up. So in today, MailChimp is a successful, thriving organization with turnover, I believe, in the hundreds of millions. So again, doing very, very well. So of course, this might lead you to thinking, so why have I picked those particular examples to talk about today? And the simple reason is that, if it wasn't already obvious, that they're all examples of great startup brands that did very well as they started, and they continue to use brand strategy and activation as a platform for growth through to where they are today. And now they sit as very, very, very successful, thriving organizations. So all of them have used brand. And throughout that process, I guess the key point to today's discussion is that size was never an issue. Nod here to anybody that finds themselves with, as a parent to young children, as do I. And here is a nod to the big bad mouse and the Gruffalo. I digress, but let's keep moving. So I guess the question then is, so what can we learn from these brands? And I think there's four things. The first one, I think all of them demonstrate that they have a very clear understanding of who they are and what they stand for. The second one is that they demonstrate an ability to think in both the short term and the long term. The third one, they all look like they are aiming to achieve some level of fame, and that's important. And the fourth thing is that they embrace creativity as a key means from which to achieve their objectives. So what I thought we'd do is we'd unpack these four things in a bit more detail. So starting first and foremost with know thyself, or having a clear understanding of who you are and what you stand for. And that's exactly what I mean by this. Having an understanding of maybe it's a purpose, maybe it's a mission. It doesn't have to be. We know there are successful brands that do that and successful brands that don't do that. So it might be that you build your positioning around a distinctive positioning around association with a certain moment, events, a subject that an organization is passionate about. Something is the point here. Something that is beyond we are an organization that does X and then just hoping it builds from there. I personally believe this is important. There's lots written about it. There's lots written that some people would even argue this is not a key point. My point of view is this is. There's lots of things you can read to understand more about it. I'm just calling out one here. The Adam Morgan's Challenger narratives that he puts in his book Overthrow. There's two versions, 1 and 2, both well worth a read. But the key point here is that why is this important? Why is it important to have a key understanding of who you are and what you stand for, and have a positioning of some sort? And it's rooted in psychology, or on what scientists say describe as the framing effect or associative learning. And what this basically means is that any product, any category can, if we so wish, be reduced back down to a commodity. A beer is just a beer. That is until maybe something like Heineken comes along and frames the product with its brand and the associations that we learn about Heineken. And I've just grabbed here maybe quality. Quality is the one that we establish with Heineken. So whenever I walk into a bar or restaurant and I see Heineken, I have a perception that this is a certain quality of beer. However, when you then build on that associations with the product with more connotations. So, for example, Brewdog, who might challenge the existing brands that are out there and say that beer is not of the standard that we would anticipate it to be, and we actually have high aspirations for a more passionate beer drinker who takes it more seriously. We would argue that it's better quality, and the attitude that they bring to challenging the other brands is built around a rebel, more punk, alternative, anti-corporate association, and that grabs attention per the examples we saw earlier on in this presentation. But the point is that the stronger the frame, the stronger the associations inside your audience's mind. And the stronger the associations, i.e. the more we feel about something, the more we feel about a brand, the stronger the emotions. And the reason why this is important is that emotions are the primary driver of behavior. Again, science tells us through the work of the likes of Daniel Kahneman and others that there are two systems within the brain. System 1 is all about intuition, instinct, emotion, and is fast. System 2 is a more rational thinking, logic-centered part of the brain, which is more slower in its ability to operate. The key thing here for marketers is that System 1 is responsible for 95% of the decision making. So if you have a brand, a strong framing around your brand, which really emotionally connects, you are directly speaking to the system that is part of the brain, that is System 1, which is the part of the brain responsible for the majority of the decision making. And then essentially you are circumnavigating System 2. System 2 will only kick in when there is something of distinct reason to then reevaluate the situation. If there's no reason to do it, then System 2 will remain dormant. So the importance of knowing yourself gives yourself a platform from starting to build a more stronger frame around your product, and starts to give you a platform to build a stronger emotional connection, which drives decision making. Moving on to part 2, or principle 2, if you like, This is the example of brands thinking short term and long term. And here, this is my tribute to Les Binet and Peter Field. I hope I do it some justice, but if you've not read their work, I would very much encourage you to do so. But Binet and Field say that marketing works in two ways. First of all, you have short-term sales activation marketing, which is any kind of marketing that is intended to evoke an immediate response. It therefore requires tight targeting. It requires that you identify people in the market now. Marketing offer would typically be rational and offer-based. And the goal, of course, is to therefore elicit a response or a direct response at that point. The other way in which marketing works is long-term emotional brand building. And this means any kind of marketing that is designed to evoke long-term changes in human behavior. Therefore, this type of marketing would be typically built around finding broad reach or targeting not everyone who's in the market now, but everyone who might be in the market in the future. Their messaging is typically more emotive and more human. And the goal is to create memorability, to drive an emotional connection. The problem is that in recent times, short-termism has really started to rise and has taken over the majority of brands' budget and resource in terms of the type of marketing they produce. The reason for this is often to do with, obviously, technology has evolved and become far more central to the way in which we can, to the way in which we go about marketing. It's cheaper, it's more cost efficient. It allows you to really dive in and find a more numerical response to your marketing. But the problem is that, as Binet and Field have identified, brands need both. Brands need both their long-term emotional brand building and the short-term sales activation marketing. And in fact, as a ratio, we think is around about 60-40. I think 60% of your budget should be on brand building and 40% should be on the sales activation type of marketing. And if you haven't got big budgets, I would perhaps even go as far to say that if it's not about budgets, maybe it's about resource and efforts. 60% of your efforts and resource should be in brand building, 40% should be in activation. And the great brands that are thriving today, really get it. And when you look at the marketing mix of an organization like Brewdog, as you scan this slide, you can see that there's clearly activity that they're doing, which is designed to capture broad reach and try and create an emotional connection with their audience. And there's lots of activity they're doing to actually identify the people in the market right at this point and identify and get them to buy the product at that point through more targeted means. And conversely, when you think about the brands that have not done well in recent years or are not doing well at the moment, and you start to think about the activity that we associate with these brands, you start to question whether these brands have got the short-term, long-term balance right, and whether they are focused on more the short-term. And of course, point to acknowledging this, when we talk about brand building, it's not just about advertising. Of course, when we talk about brand building, there is lots of other parts to consider. Product, innovation, having an aspiration for what you're trying to achieve, back to that knowing yourself, all important aspects of building a brand. It's not just advertising. I think, again, also been an issue with these brands we're seeing. This then takes us to the third principle that I wanted to call out today. The third one's around aiming for fame. Again, there's a nod here to Binet and Field. But really, I want to start by saying that it feels like the holy grail of marketing and brand builders really should be this thought around mental availability. And what I mean by that is to be the brand that comes to mind more often in more buying and social situations. And the key to this is fame, getting people talking about you. And what I mean by that, notice it's different to awareness. Awareness means that I know you exist, whereas fame means I know you exist, but I also find I want to talk about you. The means from which to gain a fame is salience, get noticed, stand out, give someone to talk about, and fame is almost the output, if you like, of the salience. I see it. That's how I see it anyway. But the aim has to be to get people talking about you. As a result of that, in this bottom left-hand part of this slide here, I see it as this, if you get this right, this lovely cocktail of effect, if you like, of the distinctive positioning working in coordination with a fame driving activation, which really works hard to drive a mental availability and emotional connection. The two of those things working together, I think, is where we should all be aspiring to be. And the evidence says that this works. That bottom right hand corner chart, fame driving campaigns outperform all others on business metrics. And as you scan through that, you can see the red blocks are underperforming versus the fame driving campaigns in the yellow. So that's third, aiming for fame. But I can imagine at this point, this is where people start to ask the question. The common view is that fame is expensive. Fame costs. You need big budgets and lots of resources. So it's a little bit of it's all good and well, but I haven't got the budget or resource. And what happens if you are an organization or brand without huge resources or budgets? How do you aim for fame in these situations? Well, this is where I think we get to the fourth principle, which is around creativity, embracing it and making it your best friend, as I sort of suggest here. But before I jump into this, I just want to make one point really clear. I'm not for a minute saying that fame, if you like, is free. It seldom is. And again, the evidence that we see says that to get people talking and sharing, you need to provide great online content and promote it with some kind of paid advertising. And the reality check here is that you do need to be realistic in your objectives. To become the biggest brand in the world will require specific tactics that are not free. We see that in the example we saw earlier on, for example. So Brewdog, we saw their tactics move to a more traditional form of media. There comes a point in a brand's life, if you like, where if they think we've reached the ceiling of the immediate audience, and now to get to the next level, to cross the chasm, as some would call it, you need to start rethinking your tactics. And that might mean that you need to think about more expensive means of growing the business. So I want to make that point. Be realistic. Think about where you are as an organization. Think about the objectives you're trying to achieve. And that might mean you need to really think about what it costs to achieve it. However, if you are a smaller organization, if you are more niche, if you are thinking about a more niche target, then there are some things that we can talk about in terms of how can we make marketing work harder for you? How can you make marketing communications work harder and make budgets go further? And this is this bottom half of this slide, which I'm saying here that whilst there's no guaranteed recipe for viral fame, or I certainly don't know of one. If anyone knows this is the guaranteed recipe for viral marketing and this will go crazy, then please let me know. But I don't know anything about it right now. And so therefore, I think we have to look for creative approaches which start to tip the balance more towards your favor, that you will start to get more people talking and start to get that lovely effect of fame being a part of your marketing strategy. And so I believe creative applied in the following ways can really help budgets go further. And the first one is a nod back to some of the examples we've been seeing in this presentation. First is this thought around being unexpected. The ambition to be brave and pushing boundaries. If in order to get people talking, in order to get fame, there is an expectation we're going to have to do this. Especially if you are in a situation whereby budget is not you haven't got high budgets and you need to make everything work a little bit harder for you. You're going to have to be a little bit braver. You're going to have to get people talking. There's lots of insight that suggests that your brand, what you do, is probably not the most important thing in people's lives. So to get them talking when they're out in a social situation, you've really got to be unexpected. The second one is around being distinctive. The example I've used here to prove the point is from the poster from the Bay Area Death Fest 2. As you scan that poster, there's probably only one band that I'm most keen to see, or the one band that really stands out for me to go and watch, and it definitely isn't the No Alters, as they are so-called, or Origin. I'm not that bothered. I think Party Cannon is where I really want to go and see what they're all about. What do they, do? It suggests that there is something about this band that might be a bit different to the others, and it stands out. It grabs our attention. From a BlackRock perspective, we really thought about this when it came to rethinking the iShares visual identity. We looked at the category in which iShares operates, and we looked at all of the other competition and how we could stand out. And we really felt we put together a visual identity that provides that level of distinctiveness for us. The third one is around putting yourself out there, standing up for what you believe, giving people something to talk about. I've used the example again from Simon Griffiths' organization, Who Gives a Crap. The sheer fact that he was able to put himself out there and do something which really captured that he was passionate about what he did, that meant that he generated 50,000 in funding, got people talking. It's an interesting concept, and again, it's something which we can take from and really think about, how do we also put ourselves out there for what we believe in and what we stand for? How do we give people something to talk about? And then this fourth one is around adding some societal and community value, making it so that others are glad you're around. There is one psychological factor, if you like, that we are clear of, is that people will promote and talk about those that believe what they believe or stand for what they believe. It's a human nature to do that, and Patagonia do this very, very well. This is an example of their Black Friday ad around. Then they put out that when everyone was asking to buy more, Patagonia did the opposite and said, "Don't buy our stuff. We want to be very, very conscious about consumerism in a more ethical way. And so when everyone is buying more, we're asking you to buy less." Again, it got people talking, made people realize they really believe in what they do, and they felt it makes the brand sound more authentic and will get people talking. Another example of a brand that does this well is Tony Chocolonely's, the Dutch chocolate brand. Currently, I believe the best-selling chocolate brand in the Netherlands. Also very socially centric in their proposition. They want to eradicate slavery from the chocolate industry, and they do a lot to really get people talking about the brand. This is an example of them going to deliver a petition to The Hague in Netherlands, asking them to really think about how they go about governing the production of their industry. And again, got people talking, and it really sort of put themselves out there, if you like. And then the other one is in a more sort of down to earth level, which I think is an excellent piece of branding, if you like, which really captures the heart of the business. And from Timpsons, who humbly say that if somebody has got an interview, if you're unemployed, they will dry clean your suit for free. And I've seen these signs outside Timpsons, certainly where I live. I just think it's a really simple but effective means to say that Timpsons is a good organisation, and we feel something. We feel this. We talk about emotional connection. This is something where I think there is an element of connecting with Timpsons, and I think on that point it's worth just mentioning. Some people like to twist terms that we use in brand when we say things like emotional connection or brand love. Everyone knows we're not talking about emotional connection on the level in which you have with your family, your children, or your partner. We're talking about it from the perspective of within the context of a brand. I don't walk around saying I love Timpsons, but if anyone said to them, do I think they're a decent organisation? Yeah, and I probably will have no issue with going to use them as a service as a result of that. So there's a little bit of common sense, and anyone that starts to mess around with those words, they're just looking for a rise. So take it with a pinch of salt, I always think. And then finally, I just want to talk about acknowledging that whilst it's very easy to talk about these things and everything we've spoken about in this presentation, it sometimes it feels that it's too easy just to chat about it. When actual fact and reality, it's not easy. Branding and strategy certainly sometimes means that you're asking people to step into the unknown, move them into places where they currently aren't, and ask them to go somewhere where you want them to be. From that perspective, you're tapping into situations where people will naturally react. And so you have to accept that there's going to be a situation where people are going to get in your way. And so I've just identified a few things which I think are worth just acknowledging in the job that is brand and strategy and marketing. And the first one is that everyone is an expert in brand. it's the one thing that I've noticed as a practitioner for the last 20 years is that it doesn't matter how long I've been practicing in this. There's somebody in the room who perhaps hasn't been working in brand, but knows just as much, has just as much as a point of view. It's an interesting observation. In medicine or in law, there is an element of we kind of accept that there's a level of expertise that they have that you don't have, and so you kind of understand where they come from. But in branding, everyone's got a point of view. It's symptomatic, I think, of us all being consumers, and the only way we're going to get through that is getting better at what you do. So I think you've got to accept that everyone believes that they're an expert in brand, and listen to them, but don't let it get in your way. Keep moving forward, find evidence that makes things less debatable, and take a more sort of, if you like, a more scientific approach to making a point wherever possible. Asking when you stand for something, it means you're not standing for everything, which means you're going to have to ask someone to then make a commitment to a certain positioning, which means that you can't stand for everything. Creative bravery sometimes can really make things difficult for you. You're asking someone to do something which is very different to where they are currently. Asking them to step outside of their comfort zone is not easy. Convincing people to go long and short is hard because you're asking someone to think about the long term, not just the short term. Asking them to make commitments to the long term, which might sacrifice something they're doing in the short term. Change and innovation, as I've already mentioned, is difficult. You're asking someone to go from where they are today to where they need to be tomorrow, which means that taking them into a place where they currently don't know, or it's almost an element of unknown, if you like. A lack of commitment is often sometimes an issue where people feel that they want to change direction because something's happening, and so respond to the urgent as opposed to the important is a phrase that I sometimes find myself having to defend, if you like. And then, of course, acknowledging that within every company in every world, there is always going to be an element of politics. And so learning to dance in the rain is something which I don't find easy. I'm very open about it with my colleagues that it's a challenge. But it's something that is symptomatic of being in brand. It's symptomatic of being in strategy. And therefore, finding ways through it is something which we have to embrace and, I'll say, learn how to dance in the rain. It's a skill set. If anyone masters it, I'm always open to learning more. And so with that, to conclude, brand is one of the most valuable business tools ever invented. It is not the exclusive property of large, wealthy organizations. I've identified here 4 principles to help make it work for you, regardless of your size. And they are, first and foremost, to identify adopt a clear positioning. And this might be driven by a mission, a purpose, driven by a challenger narrative. It might be through building strong associations, all of the above. But the point is, have a position. Have something which you can build your brand around. Have something which you can build those frames. Apply both long-term and short-term tactics and strategy. Build mental availability and emotional connection through aiming for fame. And then embrace creativity to overcome the barriers wherever possible. And that's it. Thank you if you've stuck through the presentation to this point, and good luck.